Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show, folks. Coming to you from New Zealand. My name's Tony, and on the show with me today I have a pretty frequently recurring guest who I always enjoy having on the show. That's John Haller. Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show again, John.
It's good to be back, Tony.
Yeah, and as always, we will not run out of things to talk about. There are so many things going on, so I'll let you kick off in whatever direction you think we should start, and we'll go from there.
Well, not sure where to go with everything. There's a tremendous number of things going on. As you and I were talking beforehand, maybe we can start with the thing we talked about last in our little pre-show interview. There's an article that just came out in Fast Company. It's a tech media website. And they're talking about the fact that the tech companies in Silicon Valley are working to put in place a social credit score similar to what the Chinese government has been able to do. And, I've talked about this in some of the prophecy updates I've done in the past. This is a very concerning thing. I think the last time I checked in China, there's somewhere in the order of about 12.5 million people that have essentially been put into what effectively amounts to house arrest or restricted to their location without being put in jail or anything, or even having an ankle bracelet, that they're not able to buy, for example, they're not able to buy high-speed rail tickets, they're not able to buy airline tickets, because their social media score it's like a credit score, and they're just not approved for buying those sort of things. And the Chinese government has even issued some reports where they say, last month we prohibited 2.5 million people from buying high-speed rail tickets. We prevented 800,000 people from buying airline tickets because of their social media score. And it's clearly what they're doing is they're putting in place a system that is to suppress speech, to suppress freedom of movement, freedom of speech. And what happens is, what is happening is that they're turning other people into snitches to go after other people. So there are people that, their social credit score got high enough with the strikes, or low enough, depending on how they do it, that they've essentially been removed from society. And it's a very concerning thing. Now we see our tech companies in Silicon Valley who have represented to the government that they are open platforms, and they're going to do the same thing. There's already many instances of people, for example, I don't know if you have Uber in New Zealand, but when you take an Uber ride, and I love the app, it's really one of the greatest things I see when I go travel, that I can just click on this little app and they'll show me the car, who's coming, and the driver, and that sort of thing. And at the end of the ride, I'm asked to rate the driver. Well, Uber has now put in place, as part of their program, they put in place a way for the driver to rate the passenger. So that if you pile up too many negative points, if you maybe criticize the driver, I don't know what you get negative points for. It's totally undefined. And people have found that they've been completely restricted from Uber. And if you look at the Uber terms of service, and these are drafted by lawyers, the Uber terms of service say things like, we reserve the right to terminate your account. And if you try to sign up under any other account, we're watching you and we know where you're coming from and your credit cards and that type of thing. And you're not going to be able to use Uber any longer. So there's already in place through a number of these social media companies or tech companies, there's already procedures in place that are really restricting the movement of people because you're not a good enough person. I mean, they look at evangelicals and Christians and they say, "Oh, you people are so judgmental." But we're not keeping people from doing things for the most part. So it's sort of the height of hypocrisy, I guess, is the best way to put it. But it's very concerning, and I know that you have had the problem with your YouTube channel, and I've had the problem with the YouTube channel that I publish my things through at church, at Fellowship Bible Chapel, we constantly get contacted by people who say we no longer get notices. We've been unsubscribed from the channel. And if they have their browser in restricted mode, safe mode, I guess, every video that I've ever done in terms of a prophecy update, I believe is now restricted as mature audiences. Some people sent me a notice last week. I mean, and this was within minutes of the video being posted to YouTube. They said, I got a notice that, your video is up, but it says maybe inappropriate content.
The censorship, it's just blatant censorship.
Right. But the social media companies have been given, in America, they've been given a big pass by Congress. Congress said, they went to Congress and they said, look, we're going to get sued for what Tony or John said on Minute to Midnight about someone. We're just putting it up. We're just sort of a broadcaster. We're just a conduit. So they were given, the social media companies, the tech companies, with the promise that they would be open platforms, were given this exemption from being sued for just allowing certain content to be on their site. But they didn't stop there, so they've now gone out to where there's just no question that they're censoring it. I question myself whether it's not by saying that what I put up is inappropriate content and putting me in the same category as pornography or extreme violence, or maybe the same category as an ISIS video, if you will. It's a form of libel or slander. It's a damaging statement. Now, to be honest with you, it hasn't really affected the number of views on the channel. But if I was trying to monetize my channel or our channel, they would make it impossible to do so. I don't know that they're going to get away with it forever. I think there's a pretty good move in Congress to restrict them in some fashion. But these antitrust lawsuits and those sort of things that they might use, these things can take a long time. When they tried to break up AT&T back in I don't even remember when it started. It was in court for well over a decade, going back and forth before there was a final decision that was reached. So look, this is where we're going. I know Dennis Prager at Prager University, which is probably the biggest YouTube channel in the world. Last year he got, it was 1 or 2 billion views on his YouTube channel. He puts up a new video each week. His motto is, if you give us 5 minutes, we'll give you a semester of education. And he has a lot of different people. He has former prime ministers. I think former prime minister from Australia has done a video. Some from Europe. I think the former prime minister, I can't remember his name right now, up in Canada. Former prime minister, not baby Trudeau that they have now. But he's done one, Alan Dershowitz, and they're very well done. They're very good. In fact, there was a huge article in the New York or the Los Angeles Times on last Friday or Saturday, talking about this Prager guy is really starting to control the narrative with his conservative views, and this is really terrible. I mean, we got to do something about it. I mean, it's not only. I mean, the worst thing is that he's effective. And, I think 60-70% of the views that he gets comes from people that are under the age of 30. Mm-hmm. He has students on each week. He started a thing called Prager Force. And he now has, I think, 40 full-time employees working on Prager University YouTube channel. So they've been very successful. They're not doing it. I mean, they're making some money off of it. But they're not making what you would expect for someone who has 1 or 2 billion views in a year. But they now have, at Prager University, they now have 200 of their videos that are in restricted mode, like every one of the videos that I've put up, at least that I can tell, are in restricted mode. One of those videos is on the Ten Commandments, the importance of the Ten Commandments. Prager, he's Jewish. He's an Orthodox Jew. Of course, that I don't know that defines anything, because there are different stripes of Orthodox Jews. But he's a rabbi. He teaches. He's written a commentary on the Book of Genesis and Exodus, and he talks about the importance of the Ten Commandments. Google was asked, the CEO of Google was asked about that in a congressional hearing a few weeks ago, at which Dennis Prager also testified. He was asked, why did you restrict the video on the Ten Commandments? And his response was, well, it talks about murder. And Dennis was like, and Dennis, when he testified, he said, the answer is foolish, because we talk about don't murder. Mm. How do you say don't murder without saying the word murder? Mm. And clearly it's a content control by Google.
Yeah.
At the same hearing, I don't know if you saw it, there was a Dr. Epstein, not the Jeffrey Epstein that has, or maybe has, gone on to meet his reward, but a Dr. Epstein who's done, I think he might be from San Diego State University. He's done media research, and he said by the way Google controlled the search results, search engine results, in the last election in 2016, by his research, and he's pretty solid in his research, and by the way, he voted for Hillary Clinton. He said that the social media companies, he believes, flipped 2.5 million votes for Hillary Clinton. And that if the techniques that they've developed in the interim are allowed to go, that they will flip 1,600 or 16 million votes for the Democratic candidate in the next election. And even as a Hillary Clinton supporter, he is alarmed at what's happening. So we talk about the how bad the Trump collusion and all these social media narratives are, but our tech companies are probably doing more than the Russians who spent, I don't know, a few $100,000. It's just ridiculous.
With the YouTube, even with us, like our view numbers have been down, but I also see that I do get so many people contacting me at times saying we've been unsubscribed, and sometimes they've resubscribed and they're unsubscribed again. I mean, I've had family and friends and so on become part of that. So I'm hearing it from a certain number of people. How many more am I not hearing from that it's happening to? But I've noticed that each day at the moment, if I gain any new subscribers during that day, by the time I come back the next day, it's gone down again. So I'm basically stagnant. Our It's Midnight channel is stagnant or going down. At the moment, it's down. Our subscribers are down. But it's just how many of those are unsubscribing themselves? Probably maybe some, but there's an awful lot that are being unsubscribed without their wishes. And I'm wondering how many other, because we're obviously we're getting new subscribers. So every time we're getting new subscribers, it's like the other hand is taking away old subscribers so we don't actually get any growth. It's just so frustrating.
Yeah, and I think you could track a little bit too about the kind of, if the views are sort of related to, I think there's a ratio of views to likes, dislikes.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're not really going down. That's the thing. The supposed number of views are going down, but the number of likes on the videos are not going down. So you've got to wonder how accurate those view counters are. I don't believe they're accurate at all, but, that's what they're telling you anyway.
Yeah. Well, we're not trying to monetize the churches that I teach at. Is not trying to monetize the channel. But, I thought of setting up my own channel and that type of thing. But, the question is, if you're doing it to make any sort of a living, and I know from you that from you and me and this type of thing, producing these videos and doing the research and getting the subscriptions and that sort of thing to media, the bandwidth, setting the little studio, having a decent quality microphone, all of these things cost money. So, fortunately, I have a job at present. I'm still a practicing lawyer, so I'm able to do it. But there's some weeks or some months that it's a bit tight because of the costs and things that I incur in subscriptions and books to read and review, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I have never had monetizing on our channel. I just felt that was not what God wanted us to do. I'm entirely now, the last quite a while, living on donations, which is extremely tight. It's not like there's a lot to come and go on. I'm managing, but if I had to do other work now, I just couldn't do a minute to midnight the way it is. It's a full-time job without becoming exhausted, because I obviously need breaks from it, and I get sent stuff all the time. And I'm just going to say it, if people contact me and I don't reply, sometimes I just get overwhelmed, so I just don't reply to everyone. I try to most people, but hope it doesn't offend people. But really, sometimes you can't do this 24 hours a day. You need breaks from it. But when you go to the monetization thing, a classic example of that is Lynn Liars, who I had on the show recently, and she used to be able to live off the monetization. Well, she can't. She doesn't make anything now because they basically demonetized all her videos. And so now she's having to, do donations as well. Whereas at one point, she was getting enough money to carry on through the monetizing. But of course, they've done the same thing to her and unsubscribe people and put her into shadow banning and all of those things. So it's happening to a lot of us. I wonder if it happens to people that are liberal. I've not heard of any cases of it.
Well, I haven't heard anybody complaining too much about it. So, but then again, I don't know that anybody on YouTube that's super, well, I don't know, because I don't watch them. Why would they get on YouTube and do something when you have CNN and MSNBC and other places like that? That it seems like it's a bit of a waste. But this kind of goes into maybe one of the next topics we can talk about is the way these narratives in media develop. I read a lot of different newspapers. I read the New York Times. I read the Washington Post. I read other mainstream news media outlets because usually they have an agenda, but they also at some point have to get around to the facts. So if you read the New York Times, usually buried in the middle of the article or near the end will be the facts that they're basing everything on. The other part is editorial opinion. So there's a way to read these publications, but what's interesting is the way the media narrative changes, and I know it can be a bit of a touchy subject, but for example, about 2 weeks ago, maybe a week, about 2 weeks ago, the New York Times had an editorial board meeting. And the editor of the New York Times at the time, I can't remember his name. You can Google it and find this out. There's actually a transcript of the meeting. There's actually an audio tape of what was said at the meeting. And the decision was made to change the narrative from in terms of American politics, from the Trump-Russia collusion narrative to the Trump is a racist narrative. And they talked about this openly at the meeting. Now, that subsequently, within a day, the New York Times came out with a big New York article in their weekly magazine, not this past week, but the week before that, called 1619 was the title. And it's a 1619 project. And essentially what they're doing is they're taking the narrative, they're taking the problems with racism and slavery and that type of thing. And essentially the narrative is America was never legitimate. Nothing in America's ever been legitimate. It was all racist. It was all based on racism and slavery and that sort of thing. It ignores a lot of historical facts. And that's not to minimize American slavery was probably, it was brutal. It was a brutality that's certainly as bad as what you see in history, but it wasn't everybody in the United States, and we were able to eventually do away with slavery, but then we still had the racist laws. And so, I mean, this all took time to do this, but this has been a human condition. Slavery has been a human condition since the beginning almost. And it's been done away with, but we still have the after effects. But what's happening is what happened was they put out this 1619 project, they called it. And immediately all of the other mainstream media, from the Washington Post to news magazines to mainstream media outlets on television, and even the Wall Street Journal, have picked up with these stories about the 1619 project. So if you Google 1619 right now, that's 500 years ago. That's when slavery first came to what at the time was called the New World. There was no United States at that time. That was 180 years almost before the United States was actually formed with its constitution. So it's just interesting, I guess, to watch how the media just shifts its narrative, and it's like everybody's reading from the same script. I guess that's the more important point. It's an amazing thing to watch, and I don't know that it gets better. I think it's something we're going to have to live with for a long time.
Yeah, I don't see it getting any better. And then, of course, on the other side of that, you had Donald Trump with his tweets last week and his speech, the one where, he was quoting the guy's name? Wayne Root. Yeah.
Wayne Allen Root.
Yeah. And he said he's like the king of Israel. They love him. He is the second coming of God, and so on. And Trump basically retweeted that, greatest president for Israel in the history of the world, and so on. And then a few hours, I think it was, after that, he did the other, thing, which he now claims he was joking when he says, he's the chosen one to take on trade, the Chinese trade thing. But I mean, it's not.
And he looked it's clear. When he said it, he looked to the heavens. So my take on it was, I kind of heard about the tweets. I looked at the tweets. I actually pulled them off. I copied them to save them for future reference, I guess. And it also is true that when Wayne Allen Root said that, that was done in a video interview. A sort of a Skype interview with someone. So someone had to type up those quotes, and Trump had to get those quotes and then tweet them out. So it wasn't like he just retweeted what Wayne Allen Root had said. He picked them up off someplace. I'm sure there was, I don't know what social media the president reviews, but somewhere he found those quotes and copied them and put them into a couple of tweets. I don't know that I would do that. I certainly think that, it's even difficult to talk about President Trump these days, because if you don't come out and declare him to be the Antichrist, people get on your case. If you point out something good that he does, people get on your case. So it's sort of a no-win situation. So I don't know if the design is to get people to just not talk about him at all or not. Certainly, I think
personally, I think it's the deliberate division. See, Trump's doing that. Yeah, I believe he knows what he's doing, and it's definitely what it does is it causes division. But see, Obama did the same type of thing when he was in president, often going the other way, where he would tweet something like him becoming the devil or and things like that. And I think, to be honest, I think Obama and Trump are both narcissists, but they're puppets working to an agenda that they are doing what they're supposed to do, and the end result is, what does it do? It's dividing people, one way or the other. You get the Christians that follow this new apostolic reformation. That doesn't matter what Trump does. He's the greatest thing since sliced bread. He can do no wrong. He's God's anointed. He's King Cyrus type of people. Then you get the ones on the other side that doesn't matter what Trump does. They see him as the Antichrist, like you just said. And it's just what it's done is it's dividing people, and I don't think it's by accident. That's how I see it. I mean, I've said I believed long before the election that Trump was chosen to be the president. I have no qualms in saying that, because people can look it up. We were saying it nearly a year before the elections that Trump would be the next president. I also am watching what's happening in the economy, because that was what I expected would happen at some point during the Trump presidency, that he's going to be there when the collapse happens, probably. And I just think it's all by design, personally. That's how I view it.
Well, certainly, there are there's not many people in the middle with regard to Trump.
No.
He's the Antichrist or he's King Cyrus.
Yeah.
And I'm troubled by both positions.
Yep, me too.
But it's at some point you wonder, and I know his management style from talking to people who knew him in business. His management style was very chaotic, and certainly that's translated over to the current White House and administration. So it seems as if everything out there is everywhere you look, it seems to be chaos.
Yeah.
Whether it's the growing, I think, racial divide, hatred between different groups in the United States. Look, I'm a conservative person politically. I don't know that I know a white supremacist. I don't know that I've ever had a conversation with one. You would think that if all conservatives are white supremacists, I would know where the meetings are, but I don't. But it's just part of the narrative to paint everyone as an extremist. The other thing you see, and I don't know if I don't keep track of what we talk about from show to show that I do, but one of the things that I'm seeing right now is a concerted push to break down traditional Judeo-Christian values by people. I think the biggest example I can think of is this pushing of the transgender agenda.
Yeah.
It's Tony, I don't have children. God never allowed us to have that. But I have plenty of nieces and nephews and great nieces and nephews and great nieces, even one great niece. I have to be honest with you. I'm not a person who's afraid of much. I know that however I depart this life, I'm with the Lord, but I'm afraid for the kids with this agenda. I mean, I talk about it almost every week because it seems like something comes out every single week. A couple weeks ago, I talked about the meeting of the American Library Association, where they had 22,000 librarians from the United States come to Washington, D.C. for their convention. At that convention, they had over 100 seminars and workshops on things that you would consider to be related to the transgender or other sexual agenda. It's shocking. You can go to, there's actually a website, Drag Queen Story Hour, um, dqsh.org or .com or something. But but it's grooming. I saw a video of a young man who went to one of these things at a local library, and he was in the mode of a street preacher. He confronted what was going on, and it was interesting. There were all these little children there, and when he started talking about repent and believe the gospel and repent of your sin and that sort of thing, what was happening in the background? The mothers were like shielding their children's ears from hearing what this guy had to say.
Wow. Yeah.
But they'll sit there and they'll let these drag queens, some of whom have been convicted sex offenders, talk to their kids. And I think it's a massive form of grooming of these kids.
Yeah.
And it's happening everywhere. It's cool and it's hip. And today I was just reading more articles about the drugs that they're giving to prepubescent children to block puberty and the changes of puberty. And some doctors are standing up to it, but they're like at the risk of being drummed out of their medical associations for challenging this. And it's as unscientific as anything. Essentially, what one pediatrician said was, you're giving children medicine to make them have a disease, and you don't know what the ultimate outcome will be. You don't know whether giving them puberty blockers will have an ultimate effect down the road of affecting their cardiovascular system and that type of thing. You have no research for this, and yet you're doing it with the approval of a lot of the medical associations.
Yeah. So I just comes back to the point to me is you cannot change a person as either XX or XY chromosomes. You can doctor it up and call them, a man, a woman, and put them in a boxing competition so they pummel the real women to just about to death. But you can't say anything because no, they've chosen to be women. You can't change their chromosomes. Bam. That to me is just like the elephant in the room.
It is, and I mean, even Martina Navratilova came out and said, she said you can't have transgender men, even with hormone therapy and that sort of thing, competing against women in tennis. And what happened? She's been completely disowned by her community, and she's a lesbian.
Yeah. It's a complete insanity that's all it is. But maybe this is all just part of the delusion, the strong delusion that, we're told is coming. And there's so many aspects of that strong delusion. But all I see is more and more people deluded by all kinds of things. But then you do speak to some people and they are concerned about these things with small children and that, and they think, oh my gosh, my kids are going to go through all of this in school. They're going to be indoctrinated because that's what they're doing, and not just with transgenderism and all of that, but the kids are just indoctrinated the minute they're sent into schools by the system in every which way. And so it's incredibly difficult for parents. And like you said earlier on, I feel for the kids today because it's not like it was when I was a kid or when you were a kid or even when my kids were kids. It's so different, the world now, and I was just chatting to my daughter Messenger actually last night or the night before about it because she's got a young child and it's like, oh, wow, it's a struggle.
It's scary, and I'm concerned about that because I'm in my mid 60s, so how much longer I'm going to be around anyway? In fact, I just looking at a picture of one of my nephews had two twins. They're 7 or 8 months old today, about almost 8 months old, I guess, and I'm just thinking they're like, man, what's it going to be like them for in 20 or 25 years if the
Yeah.
Lord doesn't return. It's a pretty frightening prospect. But I like what you said about the delusion. We know that there is a very strong delusion coming on the world. I think before that reaches its peak, it's certainly going to be building. It's not going to just appear overnight. And so I think we're really in the beginnings of that. I mean, it's very difficult. I, have a lot of people contact me through email, messenger, that sort of thing on social media. And I'm seeing more and more people. These are good Christian people. These are solid people. These are biblically grounded people. But the question they continually ask is, I don't know what to believe anymore. Where do I go to find out what's really true and real? And the answer, I don't know that I have a good answer anymore to tell them what to do. Now, I try, and I know you try really hard to be factual in the way that, and what you talk about, what I talk about.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because, again, sort of what we were talking about with the media narratives that are out there, everything gets put through a filter. But I'm concerned, too, with people in the church a lot of times. Maybe I should preface this with this. I'm a trial lawyer. Part of my job as a trial lawyer is to sit down and look at documents, evidence, fact, interview witnesses, that sort of thing, and try to do that objectively, because it does me no good to only look at things from one perspective. But what I see a lot of times with I saw it with Obama, now I'm seeing it with Trump. A conclusion is made. Trump is the Antichrist, or he's a good candidate for it. Obama is the Antichrist, or he's a good candidate for it. And the tendency then is to filter everything through your conclusion.
Yes, agreed.
And I think it's a huge problem. And look, I struggle with it as a lawyer because I have somebody come to me, and they, the way our system is set up, it's an adversarial system. So they hire an advocate for them. But part of my responsibility, too, is to also tell them is, hey, you have a problem with this. And so now in the legal business, I don't try many cases anymore. It's been a few years since I had a trial. But I don't know that even though I'm technically a trial lawyer, when I look at the trends in society, I don't know that I want to try a case in front of a bunch of people who are going to make a decision where they're not looking at facts. They're being governed by their emotions, I guess is the best way to say it. At some point in my career, we go to seminars. Seminars are, how to be a better lawyer, how to ask better questions, how to tell the story, and that type of thing. I don't remember when it was, Tony. I've been a lawyer for, in 6 months, it'll be 50 years. I'm sorry, 40 years. Excuse me, 40 years. I'm a lawyer, not a mathematician. But some point in my career, those seminars shifted from the technical aspects of being a trial lawyer to, I don't know how else to say it, manipulating the emotions of people. And now we live in a culture where it seems like the vast majority of people run on emotions. And going in front of a bunch of people who are driven by their emotions and asking them to make a decision on facts and the law is not a very attractive prospect anymore. I'm troubled by it. And I'm really at the point where I don't know that we can do anything to change that narrative. or to change that what's going on?
Yeah, I don't think we really can. It's set in motion. I don't think it's too. It gathers motion like the snowball, and it's too late to stop it now. But the church is in disarray as well, as you started to say before. A bit. It's like, who can you trust? Who can you believe with the truth? And I'm, just thinking even of the fiasco. Well, we could just quickly go into. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but the fiasco with this Todd Bentley nonsense that's going on again at the moment.
Well, I actually I talked about that yesterday in my update, because this is something I watched for a long time. And I could go for a long time about Todd Bentley. He's been at a church just a couple miles away from me a couple times. I know people who go there. I don't know. I never fell for his act, and I think it was.
It's a good way of putting it. His act.
He might sincerely believe all of this stuff, but the whole thing surrounding him, the Emma the angel, and this vision and that vision. And I played the clips yesterday of all I call them the rogues gallery of the NAR, who got there on June 23rd, 2008, to anoint him as an apostle in Lakeland, Florida, during the Lakeland revival. And it occurred about 2.5 weeks after Paul Cain, another so-called apostle who himself was caught with problems of homosexuality and alcoholism, to the extent that the people who were trying to restore Paul Cain just said, hey, we're done with him. We're not going to have anything more to do with him because he's not following any of the things we set out. So he goes and endorses Bentley. And then within 2.5 weeks, they have the rogues gallery, Bill Johnson, Rick Joyner, Shayon, C. Peter Wagner, Stacey Campbell, Cindy Jacobs, on and on. John Arnott from the Laughing Revival. They're all there, and they're all talking about, oh, this will be great. This is an appointment with the heavenlies and all of this stuff. So they prophesied over this guy. And within a month, he'd run off with a ministry worker, left his disabled wife and 3 children, and took up with this gal and divorced his wife and married her. And now the allegations are coming out about the problems that I don't even know that we can talk about it. If we talk about it, certainly any video that's on YouTube will be marked as inappropriate content. It's shocking. It's, bisexuality, swinging, all of this stuff. And people are talking about, well, we need to restore him. But listen, and I've mentioned it yesterday, that the guys who prophesied over him are demonstrably false prophets.
Yep. And I don't know if did you ever watch I remember watching some of those fiasco, Rick Joyner sitting there with Todd Bentley in the public, restoration and all of that stuff way back then. I can't remember what year exactly it was. I guess it was 2009 or something. But I remember thinking at the time, this is absolute nonsense and, complete garbage. What's going on here? Of course, Rick Joyner with his Knights of Malta connections and all that. I've covered him a lot. But
I had somebody, I mentioned this yesterday, Tony, and somebody, I had one gentleman write and say, you shouldn't be talking about this. You're sinning by bringing this up. It happened a long time ago. And I'm like, it happened a long time ago, and we need to remember it because of the unbiblical nonsense that went on around Todd Bentley 11 years ago that no one has ever repented for.
Yeah.
And the man has continued. Now, listen, you can pray for Todd Bentley that he gets saved, whatever. The way it's interpreted in his circles is, well, we have to restore him. So look, if there's genuine repentance and that type of thing, you can restore him. But the restoration does not have to be to public ministry.
Yeah.
There are things that you can do that permanently disqualify you from public ministry. And I've seen so much. Listen, let me just back up for just 1 second. When I went to college in northeastern Indiana, in the Lake Country of northeastern Indiana, there was a group there. It had been started by a former professor at the college and seminary where I went, called the Glory Barn Faith Assembly. The Glory Barn Faith Assembly was a cult. Back in the 70s, they were bringing in 2,000 people a week. In the 70s, that was a huge, in relatively rural Indiana. I mean, the people were coming from all over, and there were all sorts of abuses. And so I worked with those people in jobs in town. I knew those people. They were in a cult. So ever since then, I have paid attention to this nonsense because people died of diseases that could have been treated. Children died because they believed it was a sin to attend to childbirth. Nurses who were there that didn't help at childbirth lost their licenses. I worked with the husband of a nurse that lost her license. This stuff, it's so unbiblical. It really gets my dander up. And when I see Todd Bentley running around with his shtick, it's the same thing. And it's about time that people in the church stood up and called this stuff the evil nonsense that it is, instead of letting it go and then acting like, oh, well, we need to restore him. He's never had a biblical ministry, in my view, so I don't know what we would restore him to.
Yeah. I listened to a bit of his speech, half pie confession, where he denies some stuff in a wishy-washy way, so you don't really know what he's denying and what he's admitting to. But I just couldn't stand listening to the guy. It's just like, oh man, this is just it's awful. It's plain awful.
Well, a clever tweet that I saw was, "What's a Todd Bentley?" And somebody said, that's something you buy with a Creflo dollar.
Oh, it's a classic.
That was great. I mean, that was so good. I mean, that's one of the ones where that's so good, I wish I had said it,
Yeah, totally. So it's definitely, that's just one example of a whole bunch of ministries that we could talk about, but which we won't, but because time's getting on.
But the problem too, Tony, is that this I think we live in the end times, closer and closer. I don't know exactly when everything's going to wrap up, but there's an increase in all of these things and a convergence. We talk about that all the time. And so I've often thought, like, well, what's this last end time religion going to look like? What's it going to be exactly? I see more and more this what I would call, I think Trevor Loudon has talked about it, the RedGreen Alliance. And I really see that as kind of the synergy there. For example, on the transgender issue, I found a tweet that Ilhan Omar had sent out last year when one of her constituents in Minnesota, a transgender man, was not allowed to participate in a female powerlifting competition. Because they said, well, you're a man. And she said in her letter that she wrote on her congressional letterhead was, there's no scientific evidence that there's a physical advantage for transgender men to women. I never know what to call them. Men who are changing into women, that they have a physical advantage in competition with women. And it's sort of like this like, she's sort of like the perfect pivot point for the RedGreen Alliance. this, the communist socialist tear down everything, and then the Islamic part that she brings with it, and she's sort of like the poster child that I think this is what's coming, and it goes beyond that. Now you see, major denominations such as even the Southern Baptists, and listen, disclaimer, there are a lot of great Southern Baptists, but I see this, Tony, and I've lost relationships over this because of the stance that I've taken. And that has been very painful for me and my wife at times. But there is this socialism, Marxism, social justice, LGBTQ agenda is coming into churches. I played a clip of a pastor who just a couple of weeks ago, a Southern Baptist pastor from Kennesaw, Georgia, who said, hey, you can be homosexual, practicing homosexual. I've looked at all the scriptures in a new light. I've reinterpreted them. I've held the wrong positions. And the church has been wrong on this all the way along. This is a Southern Baptist pastor. Now, the interesting thing, I was actually researching it today because I went back to get the video because I had edited part of it for my update. And then I went back, I was cleaning up my hard drive today, and I actually permanently deleted it. So I went back to grab the video because these things have a tendency to disappear. And the video has been removed from the church's website. Mm. But Reformation Charlotte still has the video up if you want to see it. I think it was a post around August. I think he did it in his sermon talk, whatever it was he gave to the church, on August 18th. Town Fair Baptist Church, Kennesaw, Georgia. It's been removed. The interesting thing, though, is when I was digging around the church's website, he gave this talk on how we were now going to allow active homosexuals to become members of this church and, I guess, by extension, participate in the active ministry of the church in the midst of a series on the letters to the 7 churches in Revelation. And I can't remember, it came between like Thyatira and Smyrna. It was shocking, the placement of his talk on that and what the sermon series he was doing. And it was like, but this is happening all over the place.
To be honest, I think it's increasingly difficult to find any sort of church that you can now safely attend. It's unfortunate, but it's why so many people are just still Christians but have just fallen away from wanting to be part. Well, I say fallen away, it's probably not the best way. That have decided to leave the institution of the church because it's just become such a fiasco now that you can't find very many churches that are really biblically based, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, we try really hard at Fellowship Bible Chapel. We're organized as a plurality of elders. We do have a pastor, but we have a plurality of elders. I'm one of the elders at the church, and we try really hard to be biblical. And we always tell people, always judge what we're saying by Scripture, not maybe your preconceived notions of Scripture, but what the Scripture actually says. But I will say that the thing that I get contacted about the most, because I do talk about the sermon issues quite a bit. I don't just talk about Bible prophecies that relates to geopolitics in the Middle East, because I think the deception and apostasy is perhaps the biggest harbinger of the end times. But I get contacted by people all the time. I got a couple of emails just after yesterday's, like, I live in northern San Diego County, California. I'm trying to find a church, but they're bringing in all these people who are associated with the New Apostolic Reformation and that type of thing. And we just have to make a decision that we have to leave our church. Do you know where I can go? And the answer is I often don't, because it's very, very difficult. And I was talking to some friends just the other day where they're to the point where they still attend a church. They know that what's going on in the church, I think in some respects, there's false teaching there. And they almost consider it as a mission field, the church that they're attending. Now, that's kind of difficult because having been through this myself, it's, at some point you have to decide. You always think you can change it. There's a certain amount of your own ego that gets involved. And the chance that you're going to change some of these institutions is very, very slim. The number of churches that have turned it around are unfortunately few and far between. And I think they're going to become even fewer and farther between as we get closer to the Lord's return.
Totally agree. So where can people find you anyway? I guess as we look to wrap up, it'd be a good time to tell people where they can find your church and your YouTube channel. Sure.
The church is Fellowship Bible Chapel. We meet in Sunbury, Ohio. Our church website is fbchapel.com. We're just a small church of 100 or so people. We try to stay faithful to the Word of God. I do speak on prophecy, update, those type of related things most Sundays. You can find us on YouTube under my name, John Haller, or under Fellowship Bible Chapel. I do have a couple conferences coming up that I'll be speaking at. Well, one conference coming up. I just spoke at the One in Messiah conference in Denver. And I don't know if those videos are up yet, but they'll either be up under One in Messiah or One Body Life. I'll also be speaking at the Moriel Ministries conference with Jacob Prash and Marco Quintana. I think the other speaker had to drop out because he's having open heart surgery or bypass surgery here in a couple days. That's in early October in Vancouver, Canada. You can find information on that at moriel.org. That's October 4th and 5th. So, I've got a number of videos up under different conferences that I've spoken at. You can just look for my name. I don't know that there are any fake ones up yet, but I'm sure that's coming at some point. And that's frightening. I mean, we see this fake video technology is so easy.
Yeah,
it's scary. If people think that it's hard to figure out the truth now, this fake video technology is really, it's becoming so good, it's almost impossible to figure out what's not real. What's going to happen? I mean, what happens if this is used in this next election? Boy, it's very fun.
Yeah, I guess we've just, I don't know, get our eyes back on Jesus and on the Word, and then as far as the world around us goes, I guess in some way or another, we've got to try and come out of it as best as we can. I mean, you can't come completely out of it, but I think we have to detach ourselves from the world as much as we possibly can. Well, I guess we better wrap up now. So it's been great. There's so many more things we could have talked about, but we've filled this out with a lot of pretty interesting stuff, I think. Thanks for being on the show again.
Oh, anytime, Tony. God bless.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again soon. So thank you very much, John.
Okay.
Folks, it's probably a good idea to make sure that you are subscribed to the A Minute to Midnight channel and haven't been unsubscribed. And also like this video if you're watching it on YouTube. We also put our videos on our website, aminutetomidnight.com, and you can find audio-only versions of the shows on aminutetomidnight.com as well as on iTunes. And also, we run A Minute to Midnight 100% by donations. We really appreciate donations if you can help us out. That's always something we're grateful for. And all the music that is used in the shows I've written, played and recorded, and you can download that too on our website if you want. And we also have a forum on our website which you can join if you want to, and a Facebook group. So that's about it for this episode. We'll hopefully be back in a few days' time with another show. Until we catch you in the next episode, have a great week and God bless.